What if I told you that everything you've been trying to hold on to, everything you've been gripping so tightly with both hands, was never actually yours to keep? Not because you weren't worthy of it, not because you failed or didn't try hard enough, but because some things, some people, some versions of yourself arrive only to awaken something inside you and then dissolve back into the silence from which they came. You might have felt it already, that strange lightness after someone walked away, without drama, without explanation, without the closure you thought you needed. You might have noticed how certain friendships simply faded, how certain desires you once held so desperately no longer call to you in the night, how entire chapters of your life now feel like they belong to someone else. And in those moments, if you were quiet enough, if you stopped trying to make sense of it all, you might have felt something underneath the sadness. Not relief exactly, but something older, something that knew all along. A part of you that was never surprised. There's a quality to things that leave quietly. They do not slam doors. They do not demand final conversations. They do not leave wreckage in their wake. They simply step back, soften at the edges, and eventually you realize they are no longer there. And this quietness, this absence of drama, is not a sign of indifference. It is a sign of completion. It is the way a season changes, the way a fever breaks in the early morning, the way a dream loses its grip on you as you wake. You do not argue with autumn when the leaves fall. You do not beg summer to return in December. And yet, when it comes to people, to phases of our own becoming, we resist this natural rhythm. We interpret quietness as rejection. We mistake the absence of noise for the absence of meaning. But what if the opposite were true? What if the things that leave quietly do so because they have already given you everything they came to give? I want you to think about the last time something ended without a fight. Maybe it was a friendship that slowly became a series of unanswered messages. Maybe it was a job you simply stopped caring about. And one day you realized you had already emotionally resigned months before you handed in the letter. Maybe it was a version of yourself, a way of being in the world, that you woke up one morning and could no longer inhabit. There was no thunderclap, no moment of dramatic revelation, just a quiet knowing. And perhaps you felt guilty about that. Perhaps you wondered if you should have fought harder, cared more, forced something to continue that had already run its course. But your body knew. Your body had already begun to let go long before your mind caught up. That heaviness you felt in certain conversations, that subtle pulling away when someone reached for you, that sense of going through motions that once felt alive, those were not signs of failure. They were signs of truth. Carl Jung spent much of his life mapping the invisible territories of the psyche, and one of the things he understood deeply was that the unconscious always knows before the conscious mind does. It speaks in symbols, in dreams, in slips of the tongue, in the way your energy shifts when you enter certain rooms or think about certain people. It does not argue. It does not explain itself. It simply withdraws its energy, and if you are paying attention, you feel it. You feel the life force moving away from something that once animated you. And this movement is not arbitrary. It is not a mistake. It is the psyche reorganizing itself around a deeper truth, a truth that your surface self may not yet be ready to name. And so things begin to leave, not because you're being punished, not because you're unworthy, but because you're being prepared for something that requires more space, more silence, more emptiness than you currently have. The people who leave quietly are often the ones we remember with the strangest mixture of gratitude and confusion. They did not betray us. They did not hurt us in obvious ways. They simply became less available, less present, and eventually the distance became so natural that neither of you thought to bridge it. And years later, you might think of them and realize that they were never meant to be a permanent fixture in your life. They were a mirror, a catalyst, a temporary companion for a particular stretch of road. And when that road ended, so did their presence. But we are taught to see this as failure. We are taught that love, that friendship, that connection should be eternal, should be fought for, should be maintained at all costs. And so, when something ends quietly, we feel a strange shame, as if we should have done more, been more, tried harder. But what if the quiet ending was the kindest thing that could have happened? What if the absence of conflict was not a sign of apathy, but a sign of respect for the natural cycle of things? In this video, I will share with you several signs, several inner shifts that indicate you are in the presence of something that was never meant to stay. These are not things you can force or fix. They are not problems to be solved. They are recognitions, quiet knowings that allow you to release what is already leaving, and in doing so, create space for what is trying to arrive. I invite you to stay with me, not because I will give you answers, but because I will offer you a way of seeing that might help you trust what you already feel. You may find that recent experiences, recent losses, recent moments of confusion begin to rearrange themselves into a pattern. You may find that what felt like an ending was actually a clearing. And you may find that the quietness you feared was actually the sound of something deeper beginning to breathe. There's a way that people begin to feel like strangers, even while they are still in your life. You are sitting across from them at a table, or lying beside them in bed, and you realize that you are performing a version of intimacy that no longer exists. The words are familiar, the gestures are familiar, but the current underneath has changed. You are no longer meeting each other in the same place. And this is not something you can articulate easily, because nothing has gone wrong in an obvious way. There has been no betrayal, no cruelty, no dramatic rupture. It is more like a slow drift, a gradual cooling, a sense that the connection that once felt effortless now requires effort. And even that effort does not bring you back to what you once had. You might try harder for a while. You might initiate more conversations, suggest more plans, reach out more often. But there's a hollowness to it, a sense that you're trying to revive something that has already quietly died. And this is one of the first signs. When connection begins to feel like labor, when presence begins to feel like performance, when you realize that you're holding up both sides of a bridge that no one is crossing anymore, something is trying to leave. But we resist this knowing because we have been taught that relationships require work, that love is a choice, that commitment means staying even when it is hard. And all of that can be true. But there is a difference between the hard work of growth, of facing shadows together, of moving through conflict into deeper intimacy, and the hard work of keeping alive something that has already completed itself. The first kind of work brings you closer to yourself and to the other person. The second kind of work makes you feel more alone, even when you are together. And your body knows the difference, even if your mind does not. You might notice that you stop sharing certain things with them. Not because you are angry, not because you are withholding, but because it no longer occurs to you. You have a thought, an experience, a moment of insight, and the impulse to share it with them simply does not arise. And later, you might feel guilty about this. You might think you're being distant, that you're failing at intimacy. But what is actually happening is that your psyche is already beginning to reorganize itself around their absence. It is preparing you, slowly, gently, for a life in which they are no longer central. And this preparation is not cruel. It is not cold. It is the way a tree begins to pull nutrients back from its leaves before winter, the way a wound begins to close before you even notice it healing. The unconscious is always ahead of us, always preparing the ground for what must come next. And if you pay attention, you will notice that this withdrawal of energy is not one-sided. They're doing it too. They're also sharing less, reaching out less, responding with less enthusiasm. And this mutual fading is a kind of agreement that neither of you has spoken aloud. It is the psyche of the relationship itself recognizing that its purpose has been fulfilled. But because we are so trained to see endings as failures, we often try to intervene. We try to force a conversation, to name what is happening, to fix it. And sometimes this is necessary. Sometimes what feels like distance is actually a call for deeper honesty, for more vulnerability, for working through something that has been avoided. But other times, the distance is not a problem to be solved. It is a truth to be honored. And the difference between the two is something you can only feel, not think your way into. There is a specific kind of silence that enters a relationship when it is nearing completion. It is not the silence of comfort, not the silence of two people who are so at ease with each other that words are unnecessary. It is a silence that feels like waiting, like both of you are standing on opposite sides of a door that neither of you wants to close, but that is slowly closing on its own. You might fill this silence with small talk, with plans that never quite materialize, with reassurances that everything is fine. But underneath, you both know. You both feel the thinning of the thread that once bound you. And this knowing is not something you can undo by trying harder or caring more. It is something you can only acknowledge quietly inside yourself first, and then, if the time comes, with the other person. Jung spoke often about the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are. And part of this process involves recognizing that not everyone is meant to walk the entire path with you. Some people are companions for a particular phase, a particular lesson, a particular initiation. And when that phase is complete, the relationship naturally loses its charge. It does not mean the love was not real. It does not mean the time you spent together was wasted. It means that the soul has its own curriculum. And sometimes that curriculum requires you to move forward alone or with different companions into territories that the previous relationship was never designed to enter. And this can be one of the most painful recognitions because it asks you to let go of someone you still care about, not because they have wronged you, but because the path is diverging. You might find yourself thinking about them less, not because you're trying to forget them, not because you're angry, but because your attention is naturally moving elsewhere. You are becoming interested in things that do not include them. You are imagining a future in which they are not present, and this imagining does not feel like loss. It feels like possibility. And this is another sign. When the thought of their absence begins to feel like space rather than emptiness, something has already shifted. You are no longer organizing your life around their presence. You're no longer waiting for them to show up in the way you once hoped they would. You are beginning to live as if they have already left, even if they are still technically in your life. And this is not something you decided to do. It is something that happened naturally, quietly, as your psyche began to accept what your mind was still resisting. There's a grief in this, but it is a strange kind of grief. It is not the sharp, cutting grief of sudden loss. It is more like a slow ache, a tenderness, a background sadness that does not demand your full attention, but is always there, like a low hum. You might cry about it sometimes, in unexpected moments. You might feel a wave of longing for what once was, for the version of the relationship that felt easy and alive. But even in the longing, there's a recognition that you cannot go back, and more importantly, that you do not actually want to. You want to remember it well. You want to honor what it was, but you do not want to live there anymore. And this is the paradox of quiet endings. They ask you to hold both love and release at the same time, to be grateful for what was without clinging to it, to let something be complete without needing it to be forever. Sometimes the thing that is leaving quietly is not a person, but a version of yourself. You wake up one day and realize that the way you used to move through the world no longer fits. The opinions you held, the goals you chased, the identity you constructed, all of it feels like a costume you have been wearing for too long. And there is no dramatic moment of revelation, no crisis that forces you to change. It is more like a slow disillusionment, a gradual loss of interest in the story you have been telling about who you are. You stop defending certain beliefs. You stop explaining yourself to people who do not understand. You stop trying to be seen in the way you once desperately needed to be seen. And this is not apathy. It is not depression. It is a kind of inner maturity a recognition that the self you have been performing was only ever one possibility, one way of being, and that it is time to let it go and see what else might emerge. This process can be deeply disorienting because we tend to identify so strongly with our personas, with the roles we play, the masks we wear, the ways we have learned to be acceptable and successful in the world. Jung called this the persona, and he understood that while it is necessary for navigating social reality, it is not the same as the self, the deeper, more authentic core of who we are. And sometimes, in order for the self to emerge, the persona must be allowed to die. Not violently, not dramatically, but quietly, the way a snake sheds its skin. And during the shedding, you might feel lost. You might not know who you are anymore. You might look in a mirror and feel like a stranger to yourself. But this is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is being reorganized at a level deeper than your conscious control. You might find that you're no longer interested in the things that used to define you. The career path that once excited you now feels hollow. The social circles that once felt like home now feel exhausting. The ambitions that once drove you now feel irrelevant. And this loss of interest is not laziness. It is not failure. It is your psyche withdrawing its energy from what no longer serves your deeper becoming. And if you can allow this withdrawal without panic, without trying to force yourself back into the old patterns, you'll find that a new energy begins to emerge slowly, tentatively, pointing you towards something you could not have imagined when you were still clinging to the old self. There is a particular kind of loneliness that accompanies this process. It is the loneliness of being in transition, of no longer belonging to who you were, but not yet fully inhabiting who you are becoming. You are between worlds. And in this in-between space, you might feel invisible, misunderstood, disconnected from everyone around you. People who knew the old version of you might not recognize the new one. They might ask you what is wrong, why you have changed, why you're not the same. And you might not have an answer because the change is not something you chose. It is something that is happening to you, or rather, through you. And the only thing you can do is trust it, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. Jung spoke of the process of individuation as a kind of death and rebirth, and he meant this quite literally. The old self must die in order for the new self to be born, and this death is not metaphorical. It is felt in the body, in the psyche, in the way you experience reality. You might go through periods of deep fatigue, of wanting to withdraw from the world, of needing more sleep, more silence, more solitude than usual. This is not depression, though it can feel like it. It is the psyche doing the deep work of transformation. And transformation requires energy, requires rest, requires a turning inward that our culture does not often honor. We are taught to be productive, to be social, to keep moving forward. But sometimes the most important work we can do is to stop, to be still, to allow the old structures to crumble so that new ones can emerge. And in this stillness, you might begin to notice what is leaving. You might begin to see clearly which relationships, which habits, which beliefs, which parts of your identity are no longer aligned with who you are becoming. And this seeing is not always comfortable. It can bring up guilt, sadness, fear of being alone, fear of disappointing others, fear of not knowing who you will be on the other side. But the seeing itself is a gift. It is the beginning of clarity. It is the moment when you stop resisting what is already happening and begin to cooperate with it. And this cooperation does not mean you have to do anything dramatic. You do not have to make announcements, burn bridges, or force endings. You simply have to stop trying to hold together what is naturally coming apart. There is a trust that is required here, a trust that is difficult to cultivate in a world that teaches us to control, to plan, to manage every outcome. It is a trust in the intelligence of the psyche, in the wisdom of the unconscious, in the idea that there's a larger pattern at work that you cannot see from where you're standing, but that is guiding you nonetheless. Jung called this the self, the organizing principle of the psyche, the part of you that knows the whole story, even when your conscious mind only sees fragments. And when you begin to trust the self, you begin to relax into the process of change rather than fighting it. You begin to see that what is leaving is making space for what needs to arrive. You begin to understand that nothing is random, that every ending is also a beginning, that the quiet departures are not punishments but preparations. I have seen this pattern in my own life more times than I can count. Friendships that once felt essential slowly faded, until one day I realized we had not spoken in months, and I felt no urgency to reach out. Jobs that once gave me a sense of purpose became unbearable, and I found myself walking away with a calmness that surprised me. Versions of myself that I had worked so hard to construct simply dissolved, and I woke up one morning no longer interested in being that person. And each time, there was a part of me that wanted to panic, that wanted to force things back into place, that wanted to make sense of it all before I was ready. But there was another part, a quieter part, that knew. That part understood that I was being reorganized, that I was being prepared for something I could not yet name, and that the only thing I needed to do was allow it. And this allowing is not passive. It is not resignation. It is an active participation in your own becoming. It is the willingness to feel the discomfort of not knowing, to sit with the grief of letting go, to trust that the emptiness is not a void but a fertile space. It is the willingness to stop performing, to stop pretending, to stop holding up structures that are already collapsing. It is the courage to be seen in your uncertainty, in your in-betweenness, in your not-yetness. And this courage is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is quiet, steady, patient. It is the courage of the seed that splits open in the dark soil, not knowing what it will become, but trusting the process nonetheless. One of the most difficult aspects of recognizing what is leaving is the absence of closure. We are conditioned to want endings that are clear, that are final, that come with explanations and resolutions. We want the conversation where everything is said, where both parties understand, where there is a sense of completion. But quiet endings rarely offer this. They trail off. They fade. They leave you with questions that have no answers. And this lack of closure can keep you stuck for a long time, replaying conversations, wondering what you could have done differently, wishing for one more chance to make it right. But what if the lack of closure is itself the closure? What if the absence of a final conversation is the universe's way of saying that there's nothing more to say, that the relationship has already communicated everything it needed to, and that trying to force a neat ending would actually dishonor the organic way it unfolded? There is a kind of maturity in being able to let something end without needing to tie it up neatly. It is the maturity of understanding that life is not a story with clear chapters and satisfying conclusions. It is messy, ambiguous, full of loose ends and unfinished business. And the more you can accept this, the more you can move through endings without getting stuck in the need for resolution. You can hold the memory of what was, you can honor the impact it had on you, and you can also release it without needing it to make sense in a linear, logical way. This is the work of integration, the work of allowing multiple truths to exist at once. You can be grateful and sad. You can love someone and also know that they are not meant to stay. You can honor the past and also turn toward the future. These are not contradictions. They are the full spectrum of human experience. Another sign that something was never meant to stay is the absence of bitterness when it leaves. If you find that you can think about a person or a phase of your life without anger, without resentment, without the need to make them wrong or yourself wrong, that is a sign that the ending was clean. It was complete. It was in alignment with a deeper truth. Bitterness arises when we feel betrayed, when we feel that something was taken from us unjustly, when we feel that we were promised something that was not delivered. But when something leaves quietly, there is usually no betrayal, no broken promise, just a natural completion. And this allows you to hold the memory with tenderness rather than pain. You can look back and see the beauty of what was without needing it to have been different. You can see the gifts it brought, the lessons it taught, the ways it shaped you, and you can also see that its time is over. This does not mean there is no sadness. Sadness is different from bitterness. Sadness is the acknowledgement of loss, the recognition that something you valued is no longer present. But sadness does not harden into resentment. It softens into acceptance. It opens rather than closes. It allows you to feel the full weight of what you are releasing without turning it into a story of victimhood or failure. And this kind of sadness is actually healing. It is the way the psyche processes change, the way it honors what was before moving on to what is next. If you can allow yourself to be sad without making it mean something is wrong, you will move through the ending much more gracefully. Sometimes what is leaving is a dream, a vision of the future that you held for a long time. Maybe you imagine a life with a particular person, a particular career, a particular version of success, and slowly, quietly, that vision begins to lose its luster. You stop thinking about it as often. You stop feeling excited when you imagine it. You start to notice other possibilities, other paths, other ways of being that you had not considered before. And this is not failure. This is not giving up. This is your psyche redirecting you towards something that is more aligned with who you are actually becoming, as opposed to who you thought you should be. But letting go of a dream can be one of the hardest things to do because we invest so much of our identity, so much of our hope in the future we have imagined. We feel like we're betraying ourselves if we stop wanting what we once wanted so desperately. But what if the dream was never the point? What if the dream was just a vehicle, a way of moving you forward, a way of organizing your energy and attention for a particular period of time? And now that period is over, and the dream has served its purpose, and it is time to let it go so that a new dream, a truer dream, can emerge. This requires a kind of faith that is difficult to access when you are in the middle of the loss. It requires trusting that you are being guided, that there is an intelligence at work that is wiser than your conscious plans, that what feels like an ending is actually a redirection. And this trust is not something you can force. It is something that grows slowly over time as you look back and see the pattern, as you see how the things that fell away made space for the things that arrived, as you see that you were never abandoned, only led. Jung believed that the psyche is always moving toward wholeness, toward the integration of all the fragmented parts of the self. And sometimes, in order to move toward wholeness, we have to let go of the parts that are not actually ours, the parts we took on to please others, to fit in, to survive. These parts might have been necessary at one time, but now they are obstacles. They are keeping you small, keeping you safe, keeping you from the fullness of who you could be. And so the psyche begins to shed them, quietly, without fanfare, without your conscious permission. You might notice that you are no longer willing to tolerate certain behaviors, certain dynamics, certain ways of being treated. You might find yourself setting boundaries that you never set before, not because you are angry, but because you simply cannot continue in the old way. This is the self asserting itself, claiming its rightful place, and it often feels like a quiet revolution happening inside you. And as this revolution unfolds, you will lose people. You will lose parts of your life that were built on the old foundation. And this can be terrifying because it feels like everything is falling apart. But what is actually happening is that everything is falling into place. The things that were never truly aligned with you are leaving, and the things that are truly yours are beginning to emerge. And this emergence is not loud. It is not obvious. It is subtle, gradual, like the first light of dawn. You might not even notice it at first. You might still be focused on what you are losing, on what is leaving, on the emptiness. But if you can stay present, if you can resist the urge to fill the space too quickly, you will begin to feel something new stirring, something that was always there but could not be heard over the noise of what was. There's a particular kind of peace that comes when you stop fighting what is leaving. It is not the peace of resignation, not the peace of giving up. It is the peace of alignment, the peace of being in harmony with the natural flow of your life. You stop trying to control outcomes. You stop trying to make people stay. You stop trying to force yourself into shapes that no longer fit. And in this stopping, in this surrender, you find a kind of freedom that you did not know was possible. You find that you can love without clinging, that you can care without controlling, that you can honor what was without needing it to continue. And this freedom is not something you achieve. It is something you allow. It is the natural state of the psyche when it is not being distorted by fear, by attachment, by the need to make everything permanent. I want you to consider the possibility that everything that has left your life quietly was preparing you for this moment. Every friendship that faded, every dream that dissolved, every version of yourself that you outgrew, all of it was clearing the path for who you are becoming. And who you are becoming is not something you can plan or predict. It is something that is already unfolding, already emerging, already present in the quiet moments when you stop trying to figure it all out. It is present in the way you no longer feel the need to explain yourself, in the way you're more comfortable with silence, in the way you trust your own knowing even when it does not make logical sense. It is present in the way you're learning to let go, not because you have to, but because you are ready. And this readiness is not something you decide. It is something you discover. You discover it in the moment when you realize that you're no longer holding on, that your hands have opened, that what was gripping so tightly has released. And in that release, there's a kind of grace, a kind of tenderness, a kind of love that does not need to possess or control. It is the love that allows things to be what they are, that honors the natural cycles of connection and separation, that understands that nothing is permanent and that this impermanence is not a tragedy, but a truth. And when you can hold this truth without bitterness, without fear, without the need to make it different, you are free. Not free from loss, not free from sadness, but free to be fully present with whatever is, and to trust that whatever is leaving was never meant to stay. So as we come to the end of this reflection, I want to invite you to sit with what has been stirred in you. You do not need to do anything with it. You do not need to make decisions or take action. You simply need to notice. Notice where in your life something is leaving quietly. Notice where you are still trying to hold on. Notice where there is a part of you that already knows, that has already let go, even if your mind is still catching up. And see if you can bring a quality of gentleness to this noticing, a quality of compassion, a quality of trust. See if you can allow what is leaving to leave without making it mean something is wrong with you, without making it a story of failure or rejection. See if you can honor the time it was here, the gifts it brought, the ways it shaped you, and also release it with gratitude. And if you feel called, take a few moments in the coming days to write, not to figure anything out, not to make sense of it all, but simply to witness what is moving inside you. Write about what is leaving. Write about what it meant to you. Write about how it feels to let it go. Write without judgment, without trying to make it sound good, without trying to come to a conclusion. Just let the words flow. Let the feelings move. Let the process unfold on the page. This is not therapy. This is not analysis. This is simply a way of honoring the transition, of marking the passage, of allowing your psyche to speak. Or perhaps, instead of writing, you simply sit in silence. You find a quiet place, a place where you will not be disturbed, and you allow yourself to be still. You do not meditate in the formal sense. You do not try to empty your mind or achieve a particular state. You simply sit and you breathe, and you allow whatever is present to be present. You allow the sadness, the relief, the confusion, the peace, all of it. You allow it without trying to change it, without trying to understand it, without trying to make it go away. And in this allowing, something shifts. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, gently, like ice melting in the sun. You begin to feel that you're not alone in this process, that there is something larger holding you, guiding you, loving you through it. What leaves quietly was never meant to stay. This is not a cruel truth. It is a liberating one. It frees you from the burden of trying to make everything last forever. It frees you from the guilt of not being enough, not doing enough, not fighting hard enough. It allows you to see that some things are seasonal, that some people are companions for a particular stretch of road, that some versions of yourself are meant to be outgrown. And in seeing this, you can begin to trust the rhythm of your own life, the way it expands and contracts, the way it fills and empties, the way it brings people close and then releases them. You can begin to see that you are not being abandoned. You are being refined. You are not losing. You are being cleared. You are not ending. You are becoming. And so I invite you, if this reflection has touched something in you, to like this video, to subscribe to this channel, to leave a comment sharing your own experience of quiet endings. Not because I need your engagement, but because your words might be the thing that helps someone else feel less alone. Your story might be the mirror that allows someone else to see their own process more clearly. And in sharing, in witnessing each other, we create a space where these quiet transitions are honored, where they are seen not as failures, but as part of the sacred unfolding of a human life. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for trusting the process, even when it is hard, even when it hurts, even when you do not yet understand where it is leading.